here. Now we want to really take this conversation to the next stage and think about, I mean, I love the fact that, part of what you're doing on a daily basis is having a lot of these customer conversations. And when we've been thinking about, sellers today and the transformation that's happening around X as a service, and I've been thinking a lot about that account manager and how the role is changing. Given the fact that now the customer is actually not necessarily interested in what product they're going to give them, but actually in a whole other set of factors such as service level, the security of their data, the reliability on the long term. So stepping back and talking to these sellers, what do you advise them to do in terms to really become really successful in those conversations? And then we'll come back and connect the dots with other people that might be bringing value to that conversation.
Yeah, sure. I think we've all known as sellers the criticality of communications and the way we communicate and convey what we know to be the value proposition, relevancy, price differentiation of what we do and put in front of customers. Yes. I think that role and the way we communicate is evolving to this higher level way of connecting with the customer around their business outcomes and the issues that they have as a horizontal organization. And so I think the challenge for us is to evolve our communication skills. Yes. And to take those communication skills and sort of really move them from being really the power of understanding the products and being able to explain, and this is critical, explain the products. That was sort of, I think, the first 20 years the last 20 years of selling have been about explaining the differentiation in your products. And I think when you introduce the line of business, they actually don't care how the products work. Yes. Right? So we're moving from an explain everything era to what I would say is the show me era. Yes. And what line of business and still the IT organizations within customers is they expect sellers to be able to show them how a solution can solve their most important business problems. And that's fundamentally different from using PowerPoint to, explain, the engineering roadmap of a particular product line. And so moving from, if you will, PowerPoint to a show me through demonstrations of actual solutions, I'd say that that's the great communications opportunity for any seller to move to that space. Remember this, Ash, if you have to explain something, yes, you don't have much of a solution.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly.
You should be able to show it, right? Yeah, exactly. That's why it's called a solution. Exactly.
Yeah. And I like what you said about earlier when you were talking about the narrative and the story, because I think the demo really allows you to tell that story and show the end-to-end process, the customer as well as the business functions, how all of that comes together.
I think that one of the great things, let's face it, PowerPoint served its purpose in its time for creating a logical narrative with the customer and provided an easy path, or at least a prescribed path for sellers to build their communications confidence around. If you think about it today, the demo is the new PowerPoint. Yes. It provides a mechanism to have a conversation with the customer. What that changes, though, and what the seller has to bring to the table is the story, the narrative of how that solution they're selling is relevant to the customer. Yes. And that's a different way of thinking. It's outside in versus inside out. Being product experts is inside out, and getting that more outside in perspective. Yes. And being able to really, in a way, marry the two is really, I think, where you're going to see some of that communications relevance and really the real change makers. The top 1% are going to be great at that.
Yeah, and I love what you just said. I'd love to actually see from your own viewpoint then, what the top sellers do in your own mind and could even be better at when it comes to those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. And, by definition, we all listen. That's what being in sales is about. Yes. But maybe we were trained to listen for different things in the past. And now I think it's important for us to start to listen for what's going to inform the story and the narrative. What is that idea that you can get inside the customer's head about how you relate to their needs? Yes. And what I would say is that we hear the phrase, we got to sell outcomes, sell outcomes, sell outcomes, sell outcomes. And
that's right. Yeah.
and that's a wonderful ivory tower theory,
Yes.
right? But I would say there's two things that sellers can get good at to take that ivory tower theory and bring it down to sort of the street level. Right?
Yes.
Number one is that I would get really good at understanding the concept of use cases, really trying to know and what are the use cases that really create the type of X as a service initiatives that are going to create value for that customer. Yeah. Use case thinking, meaning how will the customer benefit in a business process or business model way from the technology. That use case thinking is a wonderful way to ground your knowledge and how you build knowledge about the customer. I think we've all, in the retail business, we know that shrinkage is an important issue for them. The use case they have is how do we reduce the amount of theft inside our store shelves is a generalized use case. It's not starting with the, I've got, high density Wi-Fi that can get you down to 1 meter location.
Yes.
That's interesting. But how about if I could monitor the movement of a product off of the shelf from the minute it was touched without having to actually install any sensors on the shelf?
Exactly.
That kind of thinking is just learning to turn yourself upside down is one thing I'd say. Thinking and talking and learn to converse that way. The other thing I would say is learn to go back to something I know we're all good at. It's time to go back to the whiteboard era.
Yes.
Learn to hold unstructured conversations around how use cases can be implemented and how value can be created around them.
Yes.
And just grabbing that marker, as you know, you got the right use case and the right marker. That's the hallmarks of a great conversation.
And be willing to have that conversation and be willing to kind of live with that uncertainty of what comes next.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I love what you were saying about, the shrinkage and essentially look at the KPIs for each business process and then back into that conversation that's really driven around the customer experience, the business KPIs that are going to get affected, and then where your solution fits into that picture.
Yeah, you're spot on with respect to that. Use case is the frame, the KPI is the measure, and the whole Drucker thing is just true. You are what you measure, and how you look at those two together. Those are such fantastic questions to ask the customer. Where and how you can, really drive at some of their priorities. I think we all know that sometimes having the customer conversation around what are their priorities, sometimes can be a million foot, and you sort of feel like I'm not really resonating or relating to the customer. But when you get down to, what are your top three, use cases in your environment that you're looking at, and how are you measuring success against those? Wow. Suddenly you're asking them how they plan to be successful. And that's really what, in the end, this is all about.
Absolutely. I love that. And I, as you were talking, I've been thinking about that partnership that exists between the salesperson, the services person, and most typically some partners that are part of that equation. Any insights in terms of how to orchestrate the conversation, again, with an X as a service in mind? Because of course in the past there was a very clear handoff. It is the networking switch, and I'm off to my next deal. But now it's much longer engagement, and it's no longer really driven by the box itself versus the service or the value, the value chain that they are supporting.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it was simpler before. I had my box, you had your box. We hook them together and they deliver value.
Yes.
Today there's a more complicated relationship taking place. And how different organizations sell together and work together and bring ecosystems to help solve customer challenges. I think that what's important is that the top 1% seller is going to be the leader of a group of companies or selling organizations.
Yes.
Going to be that leader because they're going to find a way to be the narrative leader, to be the one who understands what the customer really wants to solve for, and to find a narrative that cuts across any individual company.
Yes.
And if it's the top 1% people listening to this can challenge themselves to know that that narrative is the glue that will bring all of the organizations together. That's really, in the end, I think that is sort of the way multiple teams are going to fit into some purpose to serve customers. You can't have 7 different narratives in solving a customer problem. That's the challenge. You can really have customers have to connect together.
Yes.
And I think that, if you sort of, if I could, just call upon the most overused of all, the iPhone basically took 10 or 15 individual narratives and made them into one.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Seller has to think themselves, how do I become the Mac OS? How am I going to take all these different narratives and basically say, I'm going to make it really easy for you to reduce shrinkage in your retail store. Here's how I'm going to help you meet your measurements.
Exactly.
And that's really, I think, it's tough because, all of us are used to our own area and our own box.
Yes.
But I think that digitization is coming for anybody who doesn't think that way, and whoever does is going to be in the top 1%.
Exactly. That's fantastic, Ron, to have you here on as part of this conversation. I like how we're keeping it fast and not too long. So hopefully our listeners and especially the sellers out there would appreciate the keynote nuggets that you've been very kind to share with us this afternoon. Very, very pleased to have had you here on the show, and hopefully we can come back and continue the conversation.
It's my pleasure. I look forward to it. I aspire to be top 1% myself. So anytime I'm hanging out with you, it makes me feel like I'm in that crowd.
Thank you so much, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thank you.